Destiny players have been asking for more Edge of Fate news, and we got tons of it today. A new additive melee system shaking up build crafting entirely and changing the way melees work. Exotic armor reworks across all classes. Starfire protocols back. Mask of Bakris working on different subclasses. Liar's Handshake 1-2 punch and some massive opportunities for hunter melees, and that's just to name a few. Welcome Guardians, let's dive through all this information. So our first bit of news is a new developer live stream starting next Tuesday. They say join us Tuesday, June 24th at 10 AM Pacific time as we give an in-depth look at the Edge of Fate. We'll have the dev team on the floor ready to share many details about Armor 3.0 and the new ability stat system to show you some new weapons and more. Everyone who watches this developer stream on the Bungie Twitch channel for at least 15 minutes can get the Astromancy emblem as a Twitch drop, and it looks like this. Ride of the Nine continues, and here is the updated schedule. We've talked about this and it hasn't really changed. Until next week at reset, there'll be increased currency drops for all the dungeons. And then they'll go on a 3-week rotation. Each dungeon will have increased currency drops for their specific week, a chance to get weapon drops from enemies, as well as extra loot from the final boss chest. Nonary Endgrounds with cosmetic rewards begin July 1st, and the Lootapalooza begins July 8th. Let's talk about how melee damage is changing in the Edge of Fate. Currently in Destiny 2, most sources of increased damage in the game are multiplicative. 2 hypothetical 50% damage increases are multiplied together for a total of 125% damage increase. This approach to damage increase has some problems. For one, the more damage increasing effects applied at a time, the more powerful they all become, which means that the best builds and strategies can start to revolve around simply having as many buffs as possible. This is a pattern they saw in Destiny 2 prior to the mutually exclusive empowering damage buff system for weapons. Additionally, balancing the game becomes more and more difficult the more sources of increased damage they add. They do not want to have to choose between bosses being one-shot by players who are stacking as many buffs as possible, or bosses feeling like bullet sponges to players who are not. So here's how melee is going to work now. When the Edge of Fate releases on July 15th, melee damage increases in Destiny 2 will be additive. That means 2 hypothetical 50% damage increases will be added together for a total of 100% damage increase. Now, this does result in a lower damage ceiling for melee abilities, and it's unlikely that most bosses will ever be one-shot with melee abilities going forward. But because they do not need to worry about someone stacking those melee buffs and trivializing most content in the game, they can do 2 very cool things. They are buffing almost all effects that increase melee damage, some of them by double the damage they do now. And in PvE, melee damage increasing effects always stack at full scale if applicable. The goal is to make it much easier to create a personalized build that works the way you want. In this new system, every effect that increases melee damage has been converted to use this additive damage stacking. Every item that has been changed as a part of this have been listed below with a single exception. The new melee stat introduced with Armor 3.0 increases the damage of melee abilities when going over 100 points, up to an extra 30% at 200 stat. The damage bonus provided by that stat is considered to be an increase to the base damage of a player's melee attacks and abilities, and is multiplicative with other damage increases. So in short, if you're putting together a melee build, you'll want to get your melee stat as high as possible. Additionally, melee damage no longer scales scorch and ignition damage generated by melee attacks. Bungie thinks it's healthier for elemental verbs to have a consistent effect regardless of the source that applied them. Let's now talk about glaives. As a part of this melee overhaul, they're revisiting the role of glaives in the sandbox. They would like glaives to find a more permanent home in melee-focused builds, where they provide a defensive tool to help you close in on your targets, and a faster and more potent unpowered melee ability than Guardians would have otherwise. So yeah, Glaive melee is considered an unpowered melee in the Edge of Fate. Anything that increases the strength of unpowered melee abilities will now increase the strength of Glaive melee, including the melee stat. This does come at a cost though. While glaives have a much clearer role and have a higher damage ceiling, they needed to reduce their base melee damage in PvE to bring it more in line with an unpowered melee attack. But even after these changes, glaive melee has a much higher damage per second output than unpowered melee attacks do. In short, if your build relies on unpowered melee damage, glaives will be the best way to increase your unpowered melee DPS even further. So glaive melee is now considered to be a type of unpowered melee ability. Glaive melee now triggers all effects that are triggered by any melee ability, and glaive melee in PvE has been adjusted to compensate for their increased access to melee damage increasing effects. So there's some small notes in there like melee damage against certain champions and mini-bosses reduced, the glaives not benefiting anymore from damage bonuses like Radiant. So keep in mind all of these things when thinking about your Edge of Fate melee builds. Here are some ability changes for melees for specific classes. For all classes Prismatic, Facet of Courage, the PvE melee damage bonus has been increased from 10 to 50%. For Spark of Feedback, damage increased 75 to 100, now works with Glaive melee at full effect. PvE melee damage bonus is no longer decreased when used with Syntheseps, Liar's Handshake, Knockout, Wormgod Caress, 1-2 Punch, or Winter's Guile. For Titans, Roaring Flames, maximum PvE melee damage increased 73 to 200%. The melee damage bonus against is no longer decreased when used with the Peregrine Greaves, Wormgod Caress, 1-2 Punch, or Syntheseps. Knockout PvE uncharged melee increased 100 to 160. PvE charged melee damage increased 50 to 160. And increased melee damage now works with Glaive melee at full effect. Offensive Bulwark melee damage increased 100 to 160. Works with Glaive melee, and the melee damage bonus is no longer decreased when used with Syntheseps. And lastly, Banner of War, same type of thing. 40 to 100% increase. The damage bonus provided to Blade's Fury melee attacks is unchanged. Next up, Hunters and Stylish Executioner. The melee damage bonus increased 200 to 300. Works with Glaives, and now works with every melee ability if the ability makes contact while you are leaving invisibility. In other words, projected melee abilities like Threaded Spike will benefit from damage increase if you use it at point blank. Combination Blow maximum PvE damage bonus increased 309 to 400%. Works with Glaives at full effect and also with Ascension in PvE and grapple melees. Let's now talk about exotic armor changes. For Hunters, Athresis Embrace. The PvE weighted throwing knife damage bonus has been increased 200 to 300%. Liar's Handshake and Spirit of the Liar. Basic melee and arc melee damage increased 200 to 400. Ophidia Spathe. Maximum PvE throwing knife damage bonus increased 100 to 200. And for Triton Vice, the PvE glaive melee damage increased 100 to 200. Now we move on to Titans, first starting with the Heart of Inmost Light. The melee damage bonus increased 200 to 50, now increases the damage of unpowered and glaive melee abilities. Peregrine Greaves, shoulder charge ability impact damage bonus against non-champions. Non-Tormentor and non-mini-boss targets increased from 363 to 400. Syntheseps and Spirit of the Syntheseps. The melee damage bonus is unchanged here. and is no longer decreased when used with Combination Blow, Stylish Executioner, and Glaive melee. Damage bonus is still decreased against players when used with Lightning Surge. Wishful Ignorance, maximum PvE Frenzied Blade melee damage increased 100 to 200, and Flechette Storm also increased 50 to 200. Worm God Caress, same type of thing, melee damage up 275 to 400, and is no longer decreased when used with Roaring Flames or Glaive melee. For Warlocks, there's just one here for Winter's Guile, the maximum damage increase 275 to 400. There's also changes, as you can expect, to weapon perks and exotic weapons. So PvE damage increased, and same for 1-2 Punch. It works now with all melee abilities, and they've increased the time the perk is active to 3 seconds. Bastion also benefits from the increased melee damage 100 to 300% and works with all abilities. They've also increased its perk time to 3 seconds. The Monte Carlo Catalyst will no longer deal reduced melee damage to bosses, mini-bosses, and champions. And Winter Bite now receives melee damage bonuses from a variety of sources. They've reduced the enhanced melee damage though. Here's an exotic armor tuning preview. Bungie has mentioned a bunch of exotic armor pieces in the previous sections, so it felt natural to go over the other exotics that are changing with the Edge of Fate. Many buffs and reworks here and there, and just a few minor nerfs to keep things balanced and interesting. Now, as you can imagine, this is a giant wall of text with a bunch of explanations from Bungie, but we're going to focus in on the changes in more of a bullet point style. First up, the Hunter changes. Dragon Shadow now passively boosts weapon stability and ready speed. Dodge will reload only your equipped weapon, and Dodge also grants short-term boosts to movement and handling stats. Speed Loader slacks, they're now more PvE oriented. Dodge reloads all your weapons and buffs you and your allies. Sustained damage gives class ability energy. Mask of Bakris now works with Arc and Stasis supers. Light Shift will grant stacking plus 10% damage for specific weapons, and weapon kills grant class ability energy. Capri's Sting, they've removed the PvP focused mechanics. They've removed the automatic smoke bomb activation when using a melee attack, removed True Sight when dealing damage with smoke bomb, and instead added killing weakened targets creates a burst of weakening smoke and returns smoke bomb energy. For Oathkeepers, the max damage bonus increased from 150 to 200%, and the damage bonus now accumulates faster while overdrawing. And lastly, Blight Ranger. Voltaic Mirror stacks faster and more consistently. Canceling Reflects now deal 50 to 100% more damage, and now will always blind before damaging. There's also some updated visuals, audio, and timing of the blinding shockwave to better reflect its impact. For Titan changes, we start with the Crest of Alpha Lupi. Now it triggers small healing pulses from behind barricades, and healing allies gives you barricade energy. Phoenix Cradle, there's new visuals for ally-friendly sunspots, which is a very nice addition. Sustained solar damage extends the sunspot duration, and buffing allies may create a sunspot at your feet. The MK44 stand-asides, they've removed the old melee perks, and there's now new arc-focused effects. Sprinting will grant you static charged with Juggernaut, and sprinting while amplified buffs allies with Speed Booster. Path of Burning Steps, solar damage bonus tied to Roaring Flames stacks, and they reduce the duration of Suspend, Slow, and Freeze effects. For Abeyant Leap, now increase the duration of Suspend applied by enhanced Drengur's Lashes. Actium War Rig Final Blows increase stability, ammo generation, and damage for ARs and LMGs. stacks up to 10 times, but higher stacks will decay faster. And then for Spirit of the Alpha Lupi now also grants class ability energy when healing allies. Lastly, we move on to the Warlock changes here, with Starfire Protocol. Increase the fusion grenade energy gain from dealing damage from 2.5 to 5, and reduce fusion grenade energy gain from final blows 20 to 15. Wings of Sacred Dawn. Enemies are less accurate against you while airborne, and solar weapon kills with Solar Super give restoration and reload your stowed weapons. Felwinter's Helm powered melee weakens targets by 15%. Prometheum Spurs. They've reworked it to give class ability energy and Radiant in Healing Rift and Cure in Empowering Rift. Boots of the Assembler. Noble Seekers now spawn steadily, scale with your fireteam's size. They prioritized unhealed allies, track smarter and more reliably, and will grant class ability energy instead of longer rift duration. And Geomag Stabilizers. Super regen from Ionic Traces has been nerfed 7 to 4%, and sprinting now charges Bolt Charge faster and sooner. But Guardians, there you have a bulk of the changes for this week in Destiny. There's some stuff about Bungie rewards if you're interested in that, but that is basically it. Let me know your thoughts about all these sandbox tuning changes in the comments down below, and I'm sure Bungie is going to address more of this next Tuesday in their live stream. But if you'd like to see some more Destiny news, lore, and mysteries just like this video, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. I thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next video.